The Vegas Golden Knights have started their season 9-2, and with such a great start to the season, there's been a lot of controversy about how great this team truly is, and that's what I want to target in this video, talking about, is the Vegas Golden Knights' hot start to the season a sign of what the rest of the season may hold for this team, or just a lucky beginning to the year? So if that's something that you think you will enjoy, please like and subscribe. It truly means the world to me, but let's not waste any more time. Let's go and get into the details. So as mentioned, this Vegas Golden Knights team has started at a 9-2 record through the first 11 games and is currently sitting at second, as well as technically tied for first, but playing one less game than the Boston Bruins. Now, I will say this video is being recorded on November 2nd, and will likely be up on the 3rd, so some of these things may be changing, and actually, I believe when this video will go up, Vegas should be in the middle of their game. But I still want to cover this stuff, and I don't want to wait too long. Some editing issues have postponed some of my videos, but how we're going to be targeting this video specifically is, first, I want to talk about the team itself and how it compares to the rest of the teams in the league based on games played, points per game, all that stuff, and where they rank. And then we're going to be going to something that's a little bit more complicated, and we're going to be comparing certain teams who the Vegas Golden Knights have played, their averages, and then what Vegas scored, and then doing some mathematics to come up with a solid number on how much better Vegas has been doing against these teams than previously or expected entering this game. But, many outsiders of the Vegas Golden Knights, fan bases of other teams and such, have suggested that this team isn't as great as it would look based on the record. And, I will say, at a 9-2 record, they're certainly a very, very good team. But when mentioning the fact that the teams they've won against maybe aren't the best, and they have had an easier start to the season, I wouldn't deny that. Now, I wouldn't say it's the easiest start to the season that the entire league has, but it's not incredibly difficult start. So a 9-2 record through this far does teach you a couple things. At first, it teaches you that this team's going to be able to beat teams that they should be beating, which is a very good sign because that's going to put you in a spot where you're at least going to be above 500 because you're beating the bad teams. And, so far they've been able to beat some of the good teams as well. The only two losses coming from the Flames and the Avalanche, who have both been very solid, and the Flames were undefeated at the time. Avalanche had a little bit of a rocky start to the season, but have started to get it going. But Vegas has also beat the Maple Leafs, and, they've looked very solid against good teams as well as bad teams. But first, let's kind of start with, where does Vegas rank up against the rest of the teams on the most basic form of statistics? So let's start with that. First things first, we're going to talk about games played. Now, like I said, at the time of recording, Vegas is currently tied for the third most games played in the league, which is important when you're talking about certain categories such as shots faced, shots for the team, and such, where it's based on total numbers and not averaged. But when you're talking about averages, you can compare pretty much anyone, the least number of games played to the most number of games played, and it's still going to work out because it's an average. So they're tied for third in most games played. They have the least goals against, which is very good news because being the third most games played in the entire league, having the least number of goals scored against you just really shows how great the goalies have been. It's one thing to have the least number of goals scored against you and have played the least number of games because there's a smaller amount of opportunity for goals to go in limited amount of minutes and all that stuff. But having one of the highest number of games played thus far and having the least goals against really shows how great this team has been throughout the entire season so far. They also are 13th in goals per game. So although they have been great in limiting the amount of goals for, they're still right above average for goals going in at a 3.2 goals per game, which is right below what their average was last year. But it kind of seems like this year, as expected, the goals per game per team has went down a little bit. With last year, Vegas sat under average with a 3.3. Currently, they sit above average with a 3.2. So it does seem like goals per game is kind of coming down a little bit, at least for the start of the year. And for their goals against average, Vegas currently sits at a 1.73. That is incredible. I do not believe a single team last year had less than a 2 goals against average throughout the entire year. Now, I will say, like I said, it's very early on. We're an eighth of the way into the entire season, but below 2 at a 1.73 has been incredible. They're the second best in differential as well, which they're plus 16. And they're only behind one team. I don't remember who, the Bruins. They're only behind the Bruins, and the Bruins are plus 18. So what that means is Vegas has scored 16 more goals than they have allowed, which just, I mean, when you look at that on a base level, that's going to mean you're going to win more games and you're going to lose, most likely. And that's exactly what we've seen so far. They're also 6th in shots, but as mentioned, that's kind of, you're going to be higher because you played more games. But they've been very good at getting more shots and shots faced. I don't have the amount of shots they've faced so far, but there's been multiple games where they have nearly had double the amount of shots of their opposition, and that's just great on the defense. And the more shots you get, the higher the chance for one going in, because, I mean, a goalie can only have such a great save percentage. You're going to have shutouts here and there, but with most goalies sitting around a 9 to 9.3 save percentage range, the more shots you get, the more likely you're going to get a goal. So if Vegas is able to put up more shots than they're facing, especially with a team that's been doing really good save percentage-wise, they're more likely to win. So 6 in shots has been very good. But again, with games played, it's relative. I want to say, though, that like 2 games ago, maybe last game, I'm not sure, I think it was the Capitals, entering the third period had 10 total shots, which, you know, that's incredible. Normally you're getting about 30 to 40 throughout a whole game and about 10 shots per period. And entering the third period, actually partway through the third period, they were only at 10 by then. So Vegas has done a great job at limiting shots on net. They also have the best save percentage in the entire league with a 9.39 save percentage and 2 shutouts, which I also think might be tied for the best in the entire league. A 9.39 for the whole team is incredible. If one player was doing that, they're one of the best goalies in the entire league. But the whole team to do that means both goalies are playing at a top level. And that's what we've seen so far. Both goalies are top 10 in save percentage and goals against average. So really, really good showing so far for the goalies. And a 9.39 is incredible. Most likely not sustainable. They'll probably dip down to a 9.29, 9.2 to 9.3 range. But a 9.39 through 10 games, and I know we're still early in the season, but that's really, really good sign for what the rest of the season can hold. And they're second least in penalty minutes. 4. They have 57 total penalty minutes against them, which means you're not going to be on the, penalty kill that much, which is going to be just better for you. And that's another good thing because they played so many games. Now, Vegas has looked great all year, but it is good to take a look at the competition that Vegas has faced so far. So what we're going to be doing now is taking some of these stats, using stats from other teams, and the goals for, goals against for the games we've witnessed so far, and breaking things down on a little bit deeper of a level. And I'm not sure if I've ever seen anyone break it down in the way I'm going to be, so it might be a little bit complex. I'm likely going to be doing similar things throughout the rest of the year to see how good this team is doing. So if you have questions, feel free to ask them down in the comments. But how we're going to be breaking this down is we're going to go team by team. So, for example, let's start with the first game of the year. And if my editing software is working, hopefully I'll have like a table in the corner here so it's easier to break down. If not, I'm sorry, it's not my fault. My editing software has been doo-doo lately. So we're going to, for example, we're going to start with the first game of the year. We're going to go, the team would be the Kings, and the next column and row would be the record of the team at the time of facing Vegas, because I think that's important. Like, the Avalanche at the time of facing Vegas was below 500. Now they've gotten a little bit better. For other teams, they've gotten better. For other teams, it's gotten worse. So it's better to look at how that team was when they entered that game against Vegas, because the winning streaks and losing streaks can dramatically change how you look at their team. So for the Kings, it was 0-0 because the first game of the year. So record, team, then record. The next thing is going to be goals against average. So the team would be the Kings. You're going to be looking at the goals against average that they are allowing per game. And then we're going to directly next to that slash how many Vegas scored in that game. So for example, for the Kings, the Kings goals against average, they're allowed per game, was a 3.75. The Golden Knights scored 4, so they were above the expected goals against average for the Kings by 0.25. And then the next column will be the goals per game for that team. So the Kings, on average, are scoring around 375. Does that look right? I'm not quite sure. And the Vegas Golden Knights held them to only 3, so they're below that by 0.75. I will say the first 2 goals against average and goals per game for the Kings and Blackhawks are the same for each position. So I hope I didn't mess that up, but the rest are all different, so that's a good sign. So now that we've kind of explained how that's going to work, it might be a little bit confusing. Hopefully my editor works and I can put this in the corner to make it a little bit more easier to explain. But let's go and get into this. And at the end, we're going to have like a plus-minus column for totals, and we're going to talk about, how much higher, how much lower did Vegas do comparatively to the expected. So let's go and get into this. I know it's a little bit complicated, but it's going to make more sense as we go on. So Team 1, the first game of the year, was against the Kings, as mentioned. The Kings entered at a 0-0 record. Vegas would win this 4-3, and the expected for the Kings so far, and by the way, quick mention, I forgot to mention this, the goals against average and the goals per game for the opposing team is based on so far to this point, the point of recording, not when they entered the game, because that would change it a lot. The current point, because I think it's better to look at it as a bigger picture for that and compared to how Vegas did, because it just makes it a little bit easier and simpler to break down. So Kings entering this game average of 3.75 goals against. Vegas scored 4. The goals per game for the Kings were scoring 3.75. Vegas only allowed 3. Next game, we go against the Chicago Blackhawks. They entered the game with a 0-1 record. Vegas would end up winning this game on a shutout, 1-0. The Blackhawks averaged against is a 3.2. Vegas only scored 1. So Vegas is below on that and what they were expected to score that game. But so far, Blackhawks have been averaging 3.2 goals for per game, and Vegas held them to 0. So that drops it below and averages out a little bit. Kraken entered the game 1-0-1. They had a 3.36 goals against them per game. Vegas would score 5 against them. They would average a 3.5 goals for per game, and currently, or at that time, Vegas held them to 2. We're seeing a little bit of, diversity here. Sometimes Vegas is above it, sometimes Vegas is below it. And that's why at the end here, we're going to do that totaling so we can get an idea of some things. Flames entering the game were 2-0. Vegas would lose that game 2-3. Now, entering that game, the Flames goals against the Flames per game was at 3. Vegas would score 2. So they're below there. But Flames have been averaging 3.5 goals per game, and Vegas held them to only 3. Next game against the Jets. The Jets at the time were 2-1. They were allowing 2.56 goals against them per game. Vegas would score 5, well above. And they were scoring about 2.9 goals for them per game. Vegas would held them to only 2, so below that one. Avalanche entered the game 2-1. They were averaging a 2.89 goals against them per game. Vegas would score 2, so a little bit below. Vegas lost this game 2-3. Avalanche were averaging a 3.1 goals for per game. Vegas held them to 3, so a little bit below. Next up, the Maple Leafs were 4-2 entering this game. Vegas would win the game 3-1. Maple Leafs have a 2.9 goals against per game average. Vegas would score 3. They have a 2.7 goals for per game. Vegas would only allow 1. Sharks entered 2-6, had a 3.08 goals against per game. Vegas scores 4. 2.4 goals per game. Vegas only allows 2. Ducks entering the game were 1-5-1. 4.2 goals against per game. Vegas only scored 4. Is that correct? Yes. And this was a shutout victory for Vegas. Goals for the Ducks per game was 2.5. Vegas would only allow 0. It was a shutout. Next game against the Jets. Once again, Jets entered this 5-2. They would lose this in overtime 2-1. Not entering the game, in total, had a 2.56 goals against average. Vegas would only score 2, and a 2.9 goals for per game. Vegas only allowed 1. And then lastly, at the time of recording, the most recent game was against the Capitals. Entering the game, the Capitals were 5-4-1 with a 2.55 goals against allowed per game. Vegas would score 3, and a 2.9 goals per game for the Jets. Vegas would only allow 2. So I know that was really complicated, and I tried to go through it a little bit faster because it's really hard to understand. But in total, there's a lot of highs, there's a lot of lows there. Sometimes Vegas scores more than expected, sometimes they score below. Sometimes they allow more goals than expected, and sometimes they allow less than expected. Actually, for the most part, it looks like, let's break this down some more. Actually, there was not a single game that Vegas has played where they allowed more goals against that opposing team than that team averaged so far. So every single time that a team was averaging a number, like they're scoring this many goals per game, Vegas held them under that number every single game so far. Offensively, on the other hand, Vegas hasn't always been able to score the amount that teams have been averaging to allow throughout the rest of the year. Now, let's talk some totals here. So totals, we're going to talk records first. In total, the records of the teams Vegas has faced entering the game is 24, 23, and 4. So just slightly below 500. Now, the goals against average, the amount that each team has been averaging to allow is in total, with all those numbers combined, 34.05. So what I mean by that is, so the Capitals and averaged a 2.55 goals against average, and the Jets had a 2.56. You add those and you do the same thing for every single team. Same thing for goals per game. In total, that comes to a 34.05. The Vegas Golden Knights scored 35 total against all those teams, so slightly above what they were expected to do. Goals per game for each team, same setup. Added every single person's expected goals against or goals per game averages. Add them all together. 33.35 goals against average. Vegas allowed 19 total. Now, this is where the plus minus comes into things and helps you break it down a little bit more. So Vegas, in games entering record-wise, the teams were -3. So they lost 3 more games than they had won for the opposing teams. So what that does tell you is that the teams Vegas has been facing have been, in total, slightly below 500. So, there is some reason there to believe that it's an easier starting schedule. But even with the easier starting schedule, Vegas has outperformed on all other categories. They were plus on the goals against average compared to goals scored for Vegas by 0.95. So barely above, but still above. Still outperforming. Now, on goals per game versus the goals Vegas allowed, they were plus 14.35. That is a dramatic difference between expected goals for their team versus how many Vegas allowed. 14.35. That just really shows how good the goalie room as well as the defense has been. I mean, those two go hand in hand. If a goalie's doing bad, you need the defense to help you, and vice versa. So, it's a really complex way to look at it. But I also think it's a really good way to deeply analyze it. And I think this is something that on a higher level could be used. And I think is a very good way to look at things, because entering a lot of games, you may see that, this team is really bad at amount of goals allowed per game, but your team scores less than expected or more than expected. And when you do it over a long period of time, you can see how much better the team, your favorite team, is compared to expectations. Over long term, that can really show you how good your team has been compared to other teams that they faced and things of that nature. So in conclusion, for all these things, I know it's a little bit different than maybe some other forms of breaking down, but I really like breaking things down on a very deep intellectual level. But in conclusion, Vegas has faced some weaker opponents. You can't deny that. So far this year, they have faced good opponents as well as bad opponents. I mean, the Avalanche, have looked very good. The record maybe doesn't suggest that. Maple Leafs were very good entering the game. The Jets, both times, were above 500. There's been plenty of, pretty good / solid teams. Flames. But Vegas has also faced some poor teams. Ducks, Sharks, Plenty of options there. I mean, at the time, the Kraken weren't terrible, having won one game and lost one in overtime, but they don't look great either. Even with good teams and bad teams, what Vegas has faced is only 3 below 500. So the teams aren't as terrible as some people might like to suggest, but maybe not as great as some of us Vegas fans might like to think that they have been. But not only that, but they have outperformed averages on both of the major goal categories. So whether it was a good schedule or a bad schedule, which I would suggest it's somewhere in the middle. I would suggest that. Maybe a little bit worse than some other tougher starting schedules, but it wasn't as terrible as outsiders would like to suggest. The team still outperformed expectations on many levels, which is only a good sign and shows that this team is good because they're good, not just because of who they've been facing. But, even with the schedule that started on the light side, a 9-2 record is still a great look and shouldn't be pushed down because of a lighter schedule, as they have consistently scored and allowed less goals than those averages have suggested. Not only that, but Logan Thompson and Adin Hill have both been top 10 goalies so far this year, and we've seen a lot of upgrades. William Karlsson has looked very good. Jack Eichel has been looking like Jack Eichel and took over 2 important overtime games here in the past 2 games. And I think Vegas is the only team that has 2 or 3 players with 4 goals. So Vegas is definitely doing very, very good. Now, one final thing I do want to do here is kind of analyze the remainder of this Vegas Golden Knights schedule and take a little bit of prediction and look at when this schedule gets a little bit more difficult. And this is going to be a very quick subject at just the bare end of this video. If you enjoyed this content, like always, please like and subscribe. A lot of work went into a lot of these averages. But the next few games here today or tomorrow, depending on when this is released, the game would technically probably be today based on when this video is released. Vegas plays the Senators. Excuse me. My nose is running a little bit. My apologies. Senators are below the 500 threshold. They're at 4-5. 4-5 for the Senators. So right below. Canadians are going to be below. Maple Leafs, once again, Vegas beat them earlier, but pretty solid team. Sabres, not a great team. Blues, I don't even know how good the Blues are. Blues are probably right around the middle. I think they made playoffs last year. Sharks aren't good. Coyotes aren't good. Oilers, pretty solid. Canucks, I honestly don't know how good they're doing. Senators again. Kraken, Canucks, Blue Jackets, Penguins on December 1st. I mean, it's a long ways. I'll say December, it starts getting difficult. I mean, you got the Penguins right here on December 1st. Bruins, Rangers, Bruins again, Jets. December, it picks up a little bit here in December. Preds, Avalanche again, Penguins. January's tough. Oh, whoa, January looks pretty tough. Avalanche, Penguins, Kings, Panthers, Oilers, Stars. That's a pretty hot start to January. So, it's going to be a while till there's a really difficult setup of games. And if we're being brutally honest, through the next 15, 20 games, Vegas could get a really good thing rolling for them. And, I mean, a lot of these games aren't difficult. I mean, they're not terrible teams. There's some poor teams in here, but they're not all really easy games. I could see Vegas maybe dropping anywhere from 8 to 3 of their next 20 games, in brutal honesty, which would put Vegas in a spot at 9-2, and so you say the next 20 games, you go in the middle of 8-3, or whatever, you go in the middle at 5. In the next 20 games, that's really, really good. That is, 24-7 as a record is crazy. Now you just even round that down a little bit, and you go to 21-10. That's still a 2-1 record, and that's at 8 losses in the next 20 games. You're just slightly above 500 through the next 20 games, and you still have a 2-1 record. This team can really get it going through the first third of the year, which could be a great boost of confidence, which could make them win some of these games that maybe they're not expected to. So expect Vegas to continue to do well. I don't think they're going to be slowing down anytime soon. But what are your guys' thoughts? Do you like how I broke down this? It really took a lot, and I really enjoyed it. I'm probably going to be continuing doing it. If you need a little bit more of a breakdown next video, or you have any questions, feel free to leave those in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. It truly means the world to me. And as always, I hope it taught some today. I know it's very confusing, but I think we can definitely learn a little bit from some of these stats. Hope it made you smile, hope it made you laugh. Some really important to me. Affects the most day in a great way, because every single day can be a great day if you all just put in the effort. And as always, you guys all be safe out there.
But something deep inside won't